So let us start as usual with prayer for teacher and student that you all know by now. Om Sahanavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditam Astomavitvishavai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we are continuing, as I mentioned, studying from the very start the science of religion, which is otherwise called the Raja Yoga, the royal yoga, implying that it doesn't matter what approach you take. This system, otherwise known as meditation, is to do with the psyche, the mind. The mind is the queen bee of all the senses. Wherever the mind goes, all the senses follow. And so controlling the mind is everything. And that is why, in an extract, Swami Vivekananda's famous quotation, famous words, summarizing everything to do with the science of religion, he states that controlling nature, we manifest this divinity from within, controlling nature, external and internal. Internal is, of course, the mind. And so this royal entity called the mind. Now, of course, it's fashionable often to confuse mind and brain. So is there any difference? And Swami Vivekananda also points out it really doesn't matter because both are instrumental. However, we think that there's a great distinction between the brain and the mind, just as there's a distinction between electrical light bulb and electricity. The fact that when a light bulb burns out, we don't get light anymore, should not lead us to believe that the electrical current behind it has gone. So this is the analogy, really. And mind is like that. And when we look at the cosmological arrangement, the order of things, we'll see actually that everything is coming from one cosmic mind, which in yoga is called Mahat, that great entity, the great entity from which everything else comes, that creative mind. We were just reading, for example, the preface, which in itself has some profound things to say. But I want to highlight two important things. Firstly, nothing is coming from outside. He's very clear about that. And along with that, he's saying that we can divide the whole of nature into two categories, subtle and gross. We talk about the mind, it is subtle. If we talk about tables and chairs, it is gross, something that is tangible to the senses. And we know from modern science, because we're talking about science of religion, that what is tangible to the senses is really not what is actually there. And yet, our belief is that tables and chairs are pretty much permanent. If you take, for example, the subject of time, because for these objects to exist and for events to occur, two things are necessary. We require space and we require time. You can imagine that space is not just a background. This is a wrong interpretation of what space means. Space is a highly dynamic, interrelational entity. And when we view things like that, many, many problems get solved for us. We call this interactive potential, Akasha. And from Akasha, when it moves and goes into combination, in other words, when its frequency changes, then we have another variation of it. Technically, this is called Vayu. It's not wrong to translate it literally as air or wind. No, it is really kinetic energy, something that is moving more obviously. And then that movement, of course, creates friction. And from friction, we have heat, a radiation. We call this Agni. And from that, we find a liquefaction and we find a solidification. This is the cosmological order according to the yogis. So, this other important point that is made just in this preface alone says that we can divide this nature into two modes. It's the same thing, but two modes of operation are there, gross and subtle. And this helps us to solve many, many problems regarding subtlety and grossness. And one thing we should point out, the more subtle is the more causal. Now, if we think that mind is a kind of field of energy, it is not a nothing, it is clearly a something, and the yogis are going to assert this is energy, but it's very subtle. We cannot put love or hate or any of these emotions into a jar and say I have so much quantity of it, and we cannot display it objectively for somebody. And so for that reason, we have to assume it is something much subtler, and therefore much more causal. It's reasonable, therefore, to assume that from our thinking, from our mind, comes this gross world. Don't complain about your world. It seems if you take this principle as it is laid out, if you take it seriously, then the world in front of you is what you yourself created by your own thinking. And so the Sankhya's are not worried, why did God, an external factor, made a difficult world, or a world that is inconvenient or full of maliciousness, warfare, stupidity, and so on. No, the Sankhya man will reply, oh, don't worry about that. We don't believe in such an entity. How do you explain this world of difficulties? Wrong thinking, says the Sankhya. And the yogis follow the same formula. Is your own wrong thinking. Please correct your thinking, and in doing this, you'll correct your own world. Don't think that the world is inherently defective. It's only defective and asymmetrical because you thought in a difficult way, and how does thought flow? It's continuously flowing. And this is through the medium of time. We think of time as a kind of line that begins in a certain place, and we are here in the middle, and beyond it is the future. But there's no real evidence for that except our own perception, but it's a convenient perception. And so we have to have this framework of time and space in order to control nature, internal and external. And therefore, all our perceptions about time and everything else occurs in this field called the mind. Then the second thing that I would like to highlight comes like this, and I quote. He says, effort has been made to avoid technicalities as far as possible and to keep to the free and easy style of conversation. That is why it is such an important book, because it is written in an easy style. And then he says, in the first part, some simple and specific directions are given for the student who wants to practice. First part meaning his useful commentary, overall generalized commentary, before he goes into the Patanjali Yoga Sutras with its various commentaries. Then he says, but all such are especially and earnestly reminded that with few exceptions, yoga can only be practiced or can only be simply learned by direct contact with the teacher. Now, recently, I was down in the south of France, and one question came up, could our teacher be living? Or should our teacher be living, or should our teacher have come and gone in the past? What do you think? I said, well, I'm not quite sure what good a dead teacher is, because it is this direct contact that Swami Vivekananda is talking about. In other words, the teacher is acting not only as a guide for but also as someone with insight and somebody who can inspire one because of the insight. Somebody who himself has had direct experience, or herself has had direct experience, and says, out of a spirit of love and generosity, come on, please have the same experience. You may not have it now, but you will have it in the future, but you can have it now if you want. On this basis, that all of these systems are to do with one pursuit. All of the Oriental systems are to do with freedom, liberation, freedom of the soul. It is Vedanta, when you bring this aspect into this dualistic system, that says, by the way, you are never bound. If you think you are bound, this is your illusion. Actually, you're eternally free. Because if it's not like that, it gives you great logical problems. If I'm free one moment and bound the next, then I can never be free. I was never free. And I'm conditioned and subject to the same restrictions as everything else, time and space and causation. So my fundamental nature, if I'm to discover it, has to be eternally free. It can't be bound one moment and free the next. So he makes that point. He also distinguishes between Sankhya and Yoga. Because when we talk about the 6 philosophies in this Indian system, we have to understand that Sankhya and Yoga are twin philosophies. And there are other philosophies to do with atomic structures and rituals. These are twins again, more to do with the material side of things. And so far, all atheistic except marginally yoga. And then we come to Uttarimamamsa, which is Vedanta. And Vedanta can be theistic and may not be theistic. And the beauty about Raja Yoga is, supposing you say, I'm an atheist. I can't meditate in this way. I don't believe in God. Never mind. You don't have to, because you can be any number of these things. You can have a range. You can have theistic meditation. You can have atheistic meditation. You can have personal meditation. You can have impersonal meditation. But all of them follow the same guidelines and rules. No matter what meditation structure you use, everybody pretty much refers to the authority of Patanjali. And he lays out very, very simply. He says there are some steps to go through. It's no good asking, can I meditate now? Please teach me now. Because a person who has this impulsive impatience will want to do things now and forget, no, wait, there are steps. There are meditation itself, dhyana as a step, is only step number 7. You can't go directly that. Like having a great ladder and you say, let me take a giant step almost to the end, please. And never mind about meditation. I actually want samadhi. Never mind about any of those steps. Give me samadhi. Give it to me now. Instant samadhi, like instant coffee. No, you can't get it. Certain preparatory steps have got to be gone through. It's a cultivation. And the reason for that is our ignorance is dense. And there are layers of density. And when we remove one layer, another layer presents itself. More subtle, no doubt. And each layer has to be systematically removed, like obstacles. So we understand a very profound preface, and now we really go on to an introduction. All our knowledge, says Swami Vivekananda, is based upon experience. All our knowledge, without exception. Now, knowledge is not obviously knowledge sometimes. When a fly settles on my head and I go and make a hand movement, this is knowledge of how to chase a fly away. So how to chase a fly away doesn't seem very significant. But how is it that we instinctively have this movement? And what we call instinct is really learned behavior. It's from our previous experience. And that means that we don't have a linear life which begins in time from birth, goes through to death, and according to materialist atheism, ends there, and the rest is simply random fluctuation, something that is just, pure chance, something that is biologically from random selection. No, that would not be the case. It would make no sense, and it means we're headed nowhere. It's not very encouraging. But it's much more complex than that. Life is an interwoven structure of events and an interchange between the past and the present and the future. And therefore, it's not a vertical structure. It's more like a horizontal structure. Or it is more like a circular structure where there is a cause and effect relationship you can't understand, which is the cause, which is the effect, simply because in Swami Vivekananda's example, it's like a circle, and you have a point A and a point B, and you say A, B, A, B, A, B, you now have no idea which came first, A or B, because on a circle, all points are equal. So all our knowledge comes from experience. And what we call inferential knowledge, in which we go from the less to the more general, or from the general to the particular, has experience as its basis. An example of inferential knowledge, you look over on a hill, and there you see smoke. Then naturally, there's the old adage, there's no smoke without fire. Although you may not see the fire, you know fire is there. This is inference. You didn't directly perceive it, but it is inference. And our way of understanding things is more to go from the particular to the general. There must be some general principle involved. Modern physics wants to find the general principle in physics, calling it theory of everything, and postulates many, many untestable theories, such as, for example, you may have heard string theory. And string theory is not really science. It's not really even a theory, because it cannot bring about any kind of predictions. And without predictions, you can't make a model. And without a model, you cannot test something. See, the language I'm talking about is the language of science, and the topic is the science of religion. Can religion be dealt with in the same way? What is our route to understand, to validating the discovery of the yogis? There has to be credible authority, credible testimony. Somebody has to say, yes, I've had this direct experience. We mentioned a teacher earlier on. I've had it. And also, if I read the greatest rishis, the greatest mystics, for example, the 19th century mystic Sri Ramakrishna, who had every range of experience you could ever think of. And you can see how he had his influence for generations and generations to come, and no doubt for the next 1,000 years. So these great, great teachers, naturally we have to take them seriously, but yet provisionally. There are many people who say, oh, you see, you had a vision, it's a hallucination. What's the difference between a vision and a hallucination? Very difficult to define what is what. The only thing we know of is vision has a positive effect. A hallucination has a negative effect. That's the only distinction we can make. We can imagine all kinds of things. But a vision would be a perception of a reality in real terms. Hallucination can look the same, but it has a transforming effect in a positive way. It doesn't disturb the psyche. It enlightens it and serves to enlighten others, lead the way to others. And all the great mystics have had these kinds of visions or insights into realms not normally subject to our limited perception. Eyes, ears, nose, and so on, all this limits our range, giving us only 5 versions of what we see. If we had another sense, we could say 6 versions. Another 10 senses, we can say 10 versions, or 10 plus 5, 15 versions can be there. But we only have this limited way of looking at things, and we can't see the totality. That's our frustration. But supposing there was a systematic scientific method to go inward, away from the outward world, and discover the causal world, the highest generalities, and say, let me discover what is the foundation of everything. By simply shifting consciousness from the outside to the inside, then our revelation will be systematic. Our revelation will be bit by bit, step by step. And at each step will be vaster, more profound, and more truthful. This is the aim of the yogi. So we want to go from the less to the more general, or from the general to the particular, as experience as its basis. Any of these investigations has experience as its basis. Supposing somebody says, wait. I dreamt of a unicorn. Did I ever see a unicorn? You'll say everything is from experience. But you've seen a horse and you've seen a horn, and you combine these two. Yes, it's from your own previous memory. It's from your own experience. Now, in what are called the exact sciences, people easily find the truth because it appeals to the particular experiences of every human being. We can verify the experiences of every human being, and really one verification factor of what is truthful, scientifically speaking, would be not only the credible testimony, but the fact that predictions are made and a model is presented, and we can construct our model. And when we get the same results, then we can verify the experiences. And the only final full stop to our inquiry would be our direct perception. That validates everything. Having said that, we have to pursue it with an element of reasoning. There has to be some logic. Today we see many superstition things, both in modern science and in people who say, for example, in the realm of healing. I'll give you an example. A popular investigation today would be something like crystal healing. Now, if you ask somebody, do you believe in crystal healing? And they say yes. And then you say, why? The why has to come with a scientific commentary. There has to be some rationale behind it, some reasonable explanation that will convince me. It may or may not be true. I don't know. But the point is, give me the explanation. And so often people come up with religious superstition, scientific superstition, secular superstition, and the evidence of superstition is you have no reasoning behind it. Please give me the scientific reasoning. If you have the scientific reasoning, the next question is, can you give me the statistical evidence for it? Can you give me the scientific inquiry that went with it? Is it testable? Is it falsifiable? This a great test from Karl Popper, a scientific philosopher. And he brings out this one statement, this one thing, that along with other principles that we use, find the simplest explanation. It's called Occam's razor. Okay. Karl Popper, that the real science has to be falsifiable. You have to come up with some kind of model, some kind of theory, and challenge. Please do me a favor, falsify this. Tell me that it's not true. Demonstrate it's not true. And with many of the so-called scientific theories today, they are completely untestable and unfalsifiable. And that means that, according to Karl Popper, this is not real science. In order to explain the fact that we have, for example, laws, most scientists today may say the laws are mysteriously immutable and they always existed. And according to cosmologists, you go back to an origin, is it called a Big Bang somewhere, arising from a singularity. Singularity means there's nothing that existed. Everything is now so unified, there are no distinguishing characteristics. First apply to black holes. Going over a horizon, you don't know what happens thereafter. So from the singularity, what happens? Well, there must be pre-existing laws. Why? And then when you investigate it, it comes back to religious principles that say there was a lawgiver that gave laws that ran the universe in a rhythm, in a certain structural melody, if you like, a creative melody, and that we call a creative God. But modern science and materialism says we don't believe in such a thing. We don't require such a thing. We have no need for this hypothesis, says Laplace to Napoleon. So, all right. But then the residue of that are eternal laws. Do away the lawgiver, but you still have laws. What an unfortunate thing. It's irrational. Some time ago, it was told the world, the universe must be isotropic and have some equality in temperature, and it's the same wherever you stand, it's the same anyway. And yet, why? Is there any reasoning behind it? Who said it was like that? So it's an assumption that has been built into calculations now and has been found. If you do away with that assumption, you get different results. Because much of the results that you want to get are fitted into a preceding hypothesis. So we have to be very careful. And also we have to be careful in the science of religion. But one thing we know, everything that we know comes from our previous experience. So, the scientist does not tell you to believe in anything, but he has certain results which come from his own experiences and reasoning in them. And when he asks us to believe in his conclusions, he appeals to some universal experience of humanity. That's what provides the rationale. In every exact science, there is a basis which is common to all humanity. We all experience, for example, gravity. Is there anybody who can deny gravity? We all experience it. We're sitting here. We're evidence of it. So, in every exact science, there's a basis which is common to all humanity, so that we can at once see the truth or the fallacy of the conclusions drawn from there. And what he's leading to is there such a thing in religion? Now, the question is, has religion any such basis or not, is the question. And he developed a series of lectures which he compiled into this book and was dictated by Miss Waldo to Miss Waldo, and she transcribed everything. And you see, in all that time ago, a long time ago, when this was dictated, 1898, whatever it was, we see it's the same. It's valid today, as much today as it was then. This is why this book is a contemporary book. We can't say it's an old book and belongs to old readers like me, and then we go back and say, it's out of fashion, it's no longer modern. It's exactly modern. So he's asking this important question. Then he answers himself, I shall have to answer the question both in the affirmative and in the negative. So what does he mean by that? Religion, as it is generally taught all over the world, is said to be based upon faith and belief. Is said to be based on faith and belief. And in most cases consists only of different sets of theories. And that is the reason why we find all religions quarreling with one another. And today you'll find it. These theories, again, are based upon belief. One man says there is a great being sitting above the clouds and governing the whole universe, and he asked me to believe that solely on the authority of his assertion. And we find in every religion there are these assertive beings, assertive people who say, this is only my way. And then you ask, what is your scope of study in scripture? Have you studied anything beyond, let's say, the Quran, or let's say the Christian Gospels, or let's say the Torah. Anything beyond that, please? No, I don't find any need to do it. I only believe in this, and that's the end of it. And see, without this questioning, what, where, why, when, how, we are not going anywhere. We can never grow. We can never discover the truth. We're just caught in a narrow section. And it is no wonder that today, in 2022, that there is a wide rebellion and repulsion even of religion. That everybody says, no, 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 no. Are you religious? No, you don't dare to bring up the subject. No religion, no God. Please don't say these things. Along with politics, probably. We're a bit more amenable to discussing politics, but as soon as you bring religion up, you have a difficulty. As you know, we belong to the Dublin City and Faith Forum, and we get on harmoniously 7 religions together. On what basis? On 2 bases. Firstly, the more we reveal the particular religions of these 7 faiths or religions, the more we realize we have more in common than we thought. And secondly, we don't go into the details of debating scripture and theology, because that's a minefield. And we're happy enough to discover universal principles, which are universally experienced. And that is the basis for unity. Even though we may not go down to the very depths of the unity and say, actually, we're all identical, there's only one without a second, as Vedanta does. So, I should point out, before I forget, that even in the preface, Swami Vivekananda, just for your own interests, points out that the difference between Sankhya and Yoga, while they are similar, twins, is like this. So he says the system of Patanjali is based upon the system of the Sankhyas, the points of difference being very few. The 2 most important differences are, first, that Patanjali admits a personal God in the form of a first teacher, while the only God the Sankhya's admit is a nearly perfected being, temporarily in charge of a cycle of creation. And second point of variance would be that the yogis hold the mind to be equally all-pervading with the soul, or the Purusha, and the Sankhyas, they do not. Just to point out the difference between these 2. All right. Now Swami Vivekananda continues. He says, in the same way, I may have my own ideas, which I am asking others to believe. And if they ask a reason, I cannot give them any. And that is why, and this is why, religion and metaphysical philosophy have a bad name. He says a bad name nowadays. We can say today, it's even worse. Every educated man seems to say, oh, these religions are only bundles of theories without any standard to judge them by, each man preaching his own pet ideas. And this seems to be completely factual. So if you take religion in this way, it is not scientific. Nevertheless, there is a basis of universal belief, says Swami Vivekananda, a universal basis of belief in religion, governing all the different theories and all the varying ideas of different sects in different countries. Going to their basis, we find that they also are based upon universal experiences, and therefore, we may add, scientific. In the first place, he says, if you analyze all the various religions of the world, you will find that these are divided into 2 classes, those with a book and those without a book. Where is he going with this? What is the credible testimony we're looking for? We're looking for something from a book. This is not to intellectualize things. It is to catch the experience of the person who says, I have directly seen God. I've directly experienced the soul. And Swami Vivekananda indeed says this. So, two classes, one with a book, one without. Those with the book are the strongest, and they have the largest number of followers. And those without books have mostly died out, and the few new ones have very small followings. And yet, in all of them, we find one consensus of opinion, that the truths they teach are the results of the experiences of particular people. Don't forget, everything we know comes from experience. The Christian asks you to believe in his religion, to believe in Christ, and to believe in him as the incarnation of God, to believe in God in a soul and in a better state of that soul. And that's a universal thing in principle. And if I ask him for reason, he says he believes in them. That's all. But if you go to the fountainhead of Christianity, you'll find that it is all based upon experience. Christ said that he saw God. The disciples said they felt God, and so forth. Same thing with Buddhism. Similarly, in Buddhism, it is Buddha's experience. He experienced certain truths. That is why he's called Buddha, one who has enlightened intellect, direct experience. He experienced certain truths and saw them, came in contact with them, and preached them in the world. And so with the Hindus in their books, the writers who are called rishis or sages declared they experienced certain truths, and these they preach. And that is thus it is clear that all the religions of the world have been built upon that one universal and adamantine foundation of all our knowledge, that is direct experience. So the teachers all saw God, they all saw their own souls, they saw their future, and they saw their eternity. And what they saw, they preached. Only there is this difference, that by most of these religions, especially in modern times, there's a peculiar claim is made, namely, that these experiences are impossible at the present day. They were only possible with a few men who were the first founders of the religions and subsequently bore their names. And at the present time, he says, these experiences have become obsolete, and therefore we have now to take religion on belief. And this, he says, I entirely deny. If there has been one experience in the world in any particular branch of knowledge, it absolutely follows that that experience has been possible millions of times before, and they'll be repeated millions of times again. One person having attained it or realized it or seen it, then everybody can do it. What is the structural difference between a Jesus and a human, another human being? They all have the same equipment. One person having done it, we can all do it. And so, the teachers of the science of yoga, in this case, science of religion or concentration as the methodology of religion, therefore, will declare that religion is not only based on the experience of ancient times, but that we can be religious that we cannot be religious until we have the same experience. So why are there so many disturbances? Because people use the term religion, they talk about religion, they talk about God, but have they felt it? Why is there so much disturbance, so much fighting, quarreling in the same name of God? There's been more bloodshed in the name of God, and you may add and religion, than for any other cause, because people never went to the fountainhead. They were content only to give a mental assent to the customs of the forefathers and wanted others to do the same. Of course, this is said before the tragedy of the last two world wars. Let us take, for example, the current war in Eastern Europe, Russia and Ukraine. And it's not our place to talk about the merits or demerits or details of such a thing, but simply to state that there is a religious war going on also, because you have the Ukrainian Eastern Orthodox Church and the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church, and these have sided with the political rulers who themselves are opposed to each other. And so there's a schism that has taken place, even amongst the Eastern Orthodox Church that prides itself on decisions by consensus. And then Swami Vivekananda, in his forthright way, says, what right has a man to say he has a soul if he doesn't feel it? Or that there is a God if he does not see him? And if there is a God, we must see him. And if there is a soul, we must perceive it. Otherwise, it is better not to believe. And then he says, it is better to be an outspoken atheist than a hypocrite. Now, this is a statement I often quote, because Swami Vivekananda is not trying to be controversial in this, but he's simply being forthright. Imagine now the hypocrisy of saying, I love the Lord your God with all your heart, and I love my neighbor as myself, except if he's a Protestant. Or the other way around. See? And the Protestants will call the Catholics papists. In Ireland, you understand this, you know. Up to Ireland, the standard thing is, what religion are you? I'm a Vedantist. Yes. Are you a Catholic Vedantist or a Protestant Vedantist? We want to know. And of course, going up in the Gero cloth, you have to make clear, I'm not a member of the Orange Order. And in my case, I used to have to say, and my name is not Jerry Adams also. So that has to be put out of the way. So the teachers of the science of religion therefore declare that religion is not based on the experience of ancient times, but the man can be religious until he has the same perceptions himself, just to repeat that. And the modern ideas go hand in, on the one hand, with the learned, is that religion and metaphysics are all a search after a supreme being are futile, except that modern science has now fallen into the trap of metaphysics as well, metaphysical speculation. I don't see any merit, any scientific merit in postulating that there are many worlds when we haven't understood this universe. There's a reason why we say universe. There's one universe we have to deal with. And to postulate anything else will fall into the realm of metaphysics, not in the realm of physics. And the more complicated we investigate the world, the more we don't seem to know about the world. And yet the more we have to postulate, thinking that we can make mental experiments and then extrapolate them beyond the range of our own Earth and our own solar system and our own galaxy. There's a huge range beyond that. So those who are interested in astronomy will understand that the James Webb telescope has gone out, and we're able to see with great clarity further and further back, but not far enough. If you go 1 billion light years away, something that we can now see, we see vast galaxies, some 4 billion light years across, incomprehensible, enough to say statistically, this is not a random clump. The universe is clumpy. It's not the same in every direction. And this mere fact of new discoveries will shake the belief of scientists who have maybe some shaky science behind what is declared as fact, even in science books today. One thing we know about science is it changes. Not so long ago, there was no question that there was an ether, Now the ether went from 1905, and now, no, there's a speed of light. 1900 and 1905, special relative comes in, which says, no, we have to do away with the ether, and we have to take into consideration quanta and things like this. There's been a whole revolution in physics. And it's a revolution we need to be aware of. Because if we live in a universe, we may as well know where we live and what its structure is. And when we do that, can we see and verify the truths of the ancient scriptures and the sayings of the ancient ones, the learned ones, who have claimed to have direct experience. And we take it for granted, based on their character and influence, that it is so, provisionally, until we ourselves discover it. This is the scientific way in religion. So Swami Vivekananda continues with the same. On the other hand, with the semi-educated, the idea seems to be that things really have no basis. Their only value consists in the fact that they furnish strong motive powers for doing good to the world. And if men believe in a God, they may become good and moral, and so good citizens. And we can't blame them for holding such ideas, seeing that all the teaching that these men get is simply to believe in an eternal rigmarole of words without any substance behind them. And they're asked to live upon words. Can they do it? And all along in these preliminary comments, Swami Vivekananda is encouraging us to view everything in a rational, scientific way, to do away with superstition, and encouraging us to get up and do the experiment ourselves. And here in Patanjali Yoga Sutras, as the basis for the philosophy of yoga, we find this formula. Now, I like to also include, as I'm doing this, not just the introductory comments and going through step by step the wonderful, wonderful words of Swami Vivekananda, rational and yet inspiring and factually, obviously factual, not only then, but today also, but to also look at the sutras themselves. The second sutra that I mentioned last week contains a very large commentary and is one of the misunderstood sutras in understanding yoga and its process in meditation. And so we often come across this idea, oh, I cannot meditate, I cannot keep my mind blank, I cannot empty my mind, it's very difficult. And as I mentioned many times before, nobody suggested that your mind is a garbage can that has to be emptied and collected by the pandit waste people from time to time. No, not at all. And it is referred to, this mind is referred to as antakarana, internal instrument. And an instrument has a purpose. It has a function. What to do with it? How do we direct it? Can we do it usefully? And so it is restraining. Yoga as defined, yoga chitta, vritti, nirodha, is restraining the mind stuff, chitta, from taking various forms of vrittis. And then this vast commentary comes, and rather than me summarizing it, it is worthwhile at least beginning to understand what we mean by this. So Swami Vivekananda says in his commentary, a good deal of explanation is necessary here. We have to understand what chitta is and what the vrittis are. And to do this, we can evoke the image of a lake. So, I have eyes, he says. Eyes do not see. Take away the brain center which is in the head and the eyes will still be there. And Swami Vivekananda here is using brain as a concession to avoid confusion, brain-mind dichotomy. Take away the brain center which is in the head and the eyes will still be there. The retina is complete, has also the pictures of objects on them, and yet the eyes will not see. So the eyes are only a secondary instrument and not the organ of vision. Then he mentions the same thing with the ears and so on. Something else is necessary. Attention is necessary. This is what he goes on to see. Then he says, because your mind has not attached to the objects of the organs, and we can only attach the attention to the organ bit by bit, one by one. That's to our advantage because it has to work within a time framework. Let's take an example. Supposing you know 100 songs. You can't sing them all at once. You can't even sing one note or all the notes at the same time. You have to sing one note followed by another. And the brain is constructed, if you want to use this language, to anticipate what the next note will be and to go back into the memory to see what was the structure of the music that I remembered, and to link the past and the future together in the present moment. And in order to do this, I can't get all the information in one go. The usefulness of the perception of time is that I have an opportunity to put something chosen, directed in my own way. And this is called concentration. Anyway, he goes on a little further. First, there is the instrument, then there is the organ, and third, the mind attached to these two. So he's making a distinction between the eyeball and the internal organ that comes out, for example, in imagination and dream, and the attention that is necessary to link these two. The mind takes the impressions further in and presents it to the determinative faculty, buddhi. So there's a great example given by Swami Prabhavananda in his commentary on the Patanjali Sutras to get the idea of the organizational aspect of the mind. Supposing I'm standing in a field and an object I see moving, and it's moving toward me, and I can, with my faculties, assess the pace at which it's moving and the pace that it will arrive at me, and I search my memory. So first of all, there's a perception, reception. And then there's an identification. What is it? Oh, it's a bull. All right. Having done that from experience, I now understand and take it to the next port of call in my mental geography and said, who is it charging at? Oh, it's charging at me. The self-identification comes, and then the reverse report. What should I do? I should probably climb a tree now. So all of this presentation is going on from the external world through the faculties, through the real sense instruments, and reported to the mind, and reported to the determinative faculty that reports it to a self-identity, a coordinator that puts everything together. And ultimately, there's as an internal entity, and from that, from the light of that, a reverse movement happens, a reaction. And so this is the process, and this is how the Sankhya saw it, not as one lump of thing. And then within all of that, all of these processes are called waves in a kind of mind stuff, which is called chitta. And Swami Vivekananda will go into that in a beautiful commentary. And if you have this Raja Yoga with you, I urge you to go to this second sutra and beautifully read this extensive commentary, without which we cannot understand what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a mind, but what is that? And today we find, oh, mind, that's to do with neurology, or it's to do with brain activity. And when we explore the idea of consciousness, it is said, okay, we can't find a geographic area in the brain for it. So all of these things are explained by replacing the whole concept of there is an internal instrument that is really a kind of formatted consciousness, chit consciousness, a mind stuff attracted from energy around, and it is locally disturbed. it comes out in 5 ways, 5 different modifications. And these are called vrittis, waves, oscillations, disturbances. And to cut a long, long, long understanding of where we should be headed, these waves are preventing us from seeing the reality below. These waves come out in 3 distinct ways, and this gives us a methodology. And the methodology then is the key to the second sutra, not to restrain by keeping the mind blank, but restrain by deliberately cultivating a counter waves or a counter habit, reforming the habit level. This is the method. This is the true yoga. So we'll leave that off for now. And if I would encourage you to follow this series by getting a copy of Raja Yoga by Swami Vivekananda, so that as we go through this series, you can read along with me and make a note of the various commentaries I have to make on these wonderful, wonderful words of Swami Vivekananda and these most profound aphorisms of Patanjali. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thank you.
Paramahansa Swami.
Paramahansa.
Thank you, Swami.
Thank you.
Thank you, Swami.
Swamiji. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Merci beaucoup, Swami.
Oh.